All right, let's start with a really big question. What if your mind, your consciousness, that inner voice you're hearing right now, what if it isn't just a random byproduct of your brain? What if it could actually reach out and interact with the physical world? Today, we are diving deep into a field that asks these exact questions. It's a science that's trying to build a bridge between the world we can measure and the world we feel inside, tackling one of the greatest mysteries there is, the true nature of consciousness. Welcome to the world of noetic sciences.
So, where do we even start with a topic this huge? Well, we're going to follow the breadcrumbs. First, we'll face something called the hard problem, which is, the single biggest puzzle about the mind. Then, we'll get a handle on what noetic sciences actually is. From there, we'll look at some pretty wild evidence from quantum physics and our own brains before finally zooming out to see what this all might mean for our place in the universe.
Okay, so our journey really has to begin with what the philosopher David Chalmers famously dubbed the hard problem of consciousness. And trust me, it's called that for a reason. This is a question that has kept the greatest minds up at night for centuries, and it's pretty much the foundation for everything we're going to talk about today.
No, really, think about this for a second. How does that 3-pound lump of wrinkly, electrified tissue inside your head produce the actual experience of being you? I'm not talking about how the brain processes information like a fleshy computer. I'm talking about the feeling, the richness of the color red, the actual sensation of warmth from the sun, the deep ache of sadness. How does physical stuff create the non-physical, subjective miracle of what it's like to be alive?
For a long time, the standard scientific view has been materialist. Basically, matter is the real deal, the foundation of everything. In that view, consciousness is just a side effect, like the noise a car engine makes. It happens, but it's not the main event. But that doesn't really feel right, does it? The noetic view flips that idea completely on its head. It suggests consciousness isn't the side effect, it's the source. Matter doesn't create consciousness, consciousness gives rise to the experience of matter.
And that's exactly where noetic sciences comes in. This whole field is built on a pretty radical idea. To really, truly understand the universe, we can't just keep looking outward with our telescopes and microscopes. We also have to look inward. We have to start taking our own subjective inner experience seriously as a valid source of information about reality.
So what in the world does noetic actually mean? Well, it comes from an ancient Greek word, noesis, which basically means inner wisdom. It's a word for all the ways we seem to know things without relying on our five senses. You know that gut feeling you got that turns out to be spot on? Or a sudden hunch about a person? Or that flash of insight in the shower that solves a problem you've been stuck on for weeks? That is the noetic realm. And look, this is not some new trendy idea. Way back in 1902, the brilliant psychologist and philosopher William James wrote this beautiful description. He talked about these noetic moments as illuminations or revelations, deep truths that we can't arrive at through logic alone. He also said they carry this curious sense of authority, which is a great way of saying that when you have one of these experiences, it just feels profoundly real and important, even if you can't explain why.
Now let's be super clear about something. This is not about ditching the scientific method. Not at all. It's about expanding it. Noetic sciences is all about applying the same rigorous tools of objective science, controlled experiments, data analysis, peer review, to study our subjective inner worlds. It's the idea that to get the whole picture, you need both the view from the microscope and the wisdom from within. Okay, this brings us to one of the most mind-bending, absolutely fascinating parts of this entire field, the bizarre link between consciousness and quantum physics. This is where things get really, really weird. And that solid line we imagine between our inner thoughts and the outer world, well, it starts to get pretty blurry. For more than 100 years, physicists have been completely baffled by something they call the measurement problem. See, when you zoom way, way down to the level of subatomic particles, the universe just stops playing by the rules we're used to. And the weirdest part of all, reality itself seems to depend on whether or not we're looking at it. And that's not just a theory. It's something we can see in a very famous experiment. It's called the double slit experiment. Here's how it goes. You shoot tiny particles of light, photons, at a barrier with 2 slits in it. When you aren't watching, the photons act like waves, passing through both slits at once and creating a complex interference pattern on the other side. But, and this is the crazy part, The absolute moment you put a detector there to see which slit a photon goes through, its behavior changes. It stops being a wave and acts like a single solid particle. It's like the universe literally waits for a conscious observer to look before it decides what to be. This is the famous observer effect, and it leads to an absolutely staggering question. What counts as an observer? Is it the machine? Is it a person? Could it be that your awareness is the very thing that collapses all the quantum possibilities into the one solid reality you see in front of you? This idea used to be just a wild thought experiment, but now it's actually being put to the test. The Institute of Noetic Sciences, or IONS, ran these incredible experiments to see if human consciousness could directly affect a double-slit system. They had people focus their minds on the experiment, thinking that their attention would force the photons to act like particles. But what they found was even stranger. Focused human attention didn't just flip a switch from wave to particle. Instead, it seemed to sort of rattle the system, significantly increasing how much it fluctuated between the two states. It's like consciousness doesn't just observe reality, it actively perturbs it. So, if our minds can influence the world out there, it just makes sense that they have an even bigger effect on our world in here. If simply paying attention can rattle a quantum system, what can years of focused, intentional practice do to our own brains? Well, the answer is a lot, and we see it in the science of meditation. Look, meditation isn't just for monks on a mountaintop anymore, right? It's gone totally mainstream, and for a very simple reason. It works. The research is overwhelming. It reduces stress, boosts focus, sparks creativity. But the most incredible finding of all is about something called neuroplasticity, which is just a fancy way of saying your brain can literally change its own structure. This means meditation isn't just a mental workout. It's a way to physically sculpt the very organ that creates your reality. And I mean that literally. This isn't just a metaphor. We can see it on MRI scans. People who meditate regularly have measurably more gray matter, that's the stuff with all the neurons, in parts of the brain that are crucial for learning, memory, and controlling emotions. And what's wild is that studies show these changes can start to happen after just a few weeks of practice. That's how responsive our brains are to our own attention. And what's so cool is how specific these changes are. Check this out. The amygdala, which is basically your brain's alarm system, your fear center, it actually shrinks and becomes less reactive. At the same time, the hippocampus, which is key for memory, gets denser and stronger. The insula, which helps create your sense of self, gets stronger too, which boosts empathy. It is like a targeted hardware upgrade for your brain, rewiring yourself for less stress and more awareness. Okay, so if these noetic experiences are real, and science can study them, and we can even get better at them through practice, how do they actually show up for us? How do they work in our everyday lives? Well, that leads to this really fascinating idea called a noetic signature. You know how we have a personality type? Well, researchers at IONS are suggesting that we each have a unique intuition type as well. After studying thousands and thousands of people, they've been able to identify 12 distinct pathways or channels for this kind of inner knowing. And the unique mix of these channels in you makes up your personal noetic signature. And these pathways range from things that are pretty familiar to things that are, a bit more out there. You might be really strong in embodied sensations, that classic gut feeling. Or maybe your strength is an inner voice that gives you super clear guidance. Some people get a lot of information through their dreams, or they just seem to know what other people are thinking. The point is, we all have a different blend of these abilities, and figuring out your own noetic signature is like discovering your own intuitive superpower. So let's put all the pieces on the table. We have consciousness influencing quantum particles. We have it physically changing our brains. We have it accessing information in all these surprising ways. What does it all add up to? What is the big, profound implication of all this research? All of these different threads, from quantum physics to neuroscience, they all point toward one single guiding hypothesis at the very core of noetic sciences, that all things are fundamentally interconnected. It suggests that consciousness isn't something that's just locked up inside our individual heads. It might be non-local, which means it isn't limited by space and time as we know it. In this view, our brains aren't so much creating consciousness as they are acting like antennas, tuning into a universal field of it. And if you're thinking this sounds a little too out there, a little too new age, you have to hear this. This quote is from Max Planck. Yes, that Max Planck, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist who basically founded quantum theory. After a lifetime of studying the most fundamental building blocks of reality, he came to the conclusion that consciousness is primary. He said we can't get behind consciousness because it's the basis for everything we know and experience.
Ultimately, the work of noetic sciences is a profound invitation to see ourselves and our world differently. It suggests that our inner world isn't just a personal, private movie playing inside our skulls, but something that is deeply and mysteriously woven into the very fabric of the universe. So the final thought I want to leave you with is this. If we truly are all fundamentally interconnected, what becomes possible? If we started living from that reality, how would we innovate? How would we heal? How would we create our future, knowing we are not just isolated specks, but essential parts of a single conscious universe?